So, absolutely delighted to welcome Maria Zapata from King Juan Carlos University in Madrid, all the way from Madrid. It's so lovely having online seminars. People can come from everywhere. What time is it with you, Maria? Is it 6?
6, yes.
6, yes, so not too awful. And thank you so much for joining us. You know, really,
thank you for inviting me.
Yep. And you're going to be talking about computational thinking, and in particular, assessing computational thinking skills for young children. So if you'd like to share your screen,
yes.
I think we can kick off. Thank you.
So good afternoon. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I'm María Zapata, assistant professor from Universidad Rey Juan Carlos from Spain, from Madrid, in the video games degree. And I'm going to talk about the computational thinking test for beginners that we've developed. Let's see. Okay, let me introduce first the 2 other researchers who are collaborating in this project, who are Estefania Martín Barroso from Computer Science Department in the Universidad Rey Juan Carlos, just like me, and Marcos Román González from UNED. And well, first of all, I would like to explain why this research was necessary. As you know, there are many definitions for computational thinking. It could be defined as the human problem-solving process that requires abstract thinking, and also it can be the thinking skills that precede programming and are applied in understanding a problem and formulating a solution like a computer scientist. And also, there are many breakdowns. For example, Schut divides CT skills into 6 facets: abstraction, decomposition, generalization, iteration, debugging, and algorithms. But there are many other definitions, and there are many other breakdowns, and this lack of consensus can cause some risks. However, there is consensus about computational thinking being a fundamental skill that can be widely applied in daily life, and that it is required to adapt to the future. And therefore, it should be introduced into the curriculum at school. So here there is consensus. And also there is evidence on programming that it exposes students to computational thinking. There are not agreed upon models either for developing computational thinking in the classroom. There are many frameworks for computational thinking, but the 3-dimensional framework from Brennan and Resnick is the most cited in research. This framework divides 3T into 3 components: computational concepts, computational practices, and computational perspectives. I think you all know about it. So there are many questions regarding computational thinking. For example, we don't know when to teach it, or how to teach it really, or what to teach in each educational stage exactly, and we don't know how to assess it either. So we think that the first question we have to answer is how to assess it, because we don't know what children have or haven't learned. If we don't know what children have or haven't learned already, or what are they capable to learn at each educational stage, we can't know what they should learn, when they should learn it, or how they should learn it. So we think the first question to ask is how to assess it, the first question we have to solve. And also, as computational thinking is a new competence we're trying to teach, if we are developing new tools or new methodologies to teach or to assess computational thinking, for example, with Dr. Scratch, or with video games as we are doing, and so on, we have to evaluate these tools in some way, and preferably with an assessment tool that is independent from the tool that we are evaluating. Because most of the times we like to assess with the same tool that we are evaluating, and that's, I think we need something that is independent from the tool. So unfortunately, there is even less agreement on which strategies are best suited to assess computational thinking at early ages. There are 4 types of assessment in current research that are traditional tests, portfolio, surveys, and interviews. And there are multiple researchers that describe experiences of integrating computational thinking assessment into the K-12 curriculum. But most of these instruments, especially in the last 3 types of assessment, in portfolio, in survey, and in interview, they are usually linked or bounded to a particular learning system or environment, or they are aimed at middle school students. So from the existing traditional tests for assessing computational thinking for assessing computational thinking, the Roman Gonzalez computational thinking test stands out because it is a self-contained instrument, because it is independent of any programming environment, and also there is evidence of reliability. They've done lots of research, and of criterion validity under a psychometric approach. And it is aligned with the international standard for psychological and educational testing. So this test is aimed at students from 10 to 16 years old. And in terms of Brennan 3D framework, the computational thinking test, the CTT, focused on CT concepts, on computational practices, just partially, and ignores completely computational thinking perspectives. So, but this is something that is going to happen because it's very difficult for a traditional test to focus on computational perspectives, for example. So, based on this computational thinking test, and also as a standalone instrument, we've developed the beginner's computational thinking test that is focused on younger students from 5 to 10 years old. And we've adapted this computational thinking test from Marcos Roman that was in the previous slide. We've adapted it both in form and content. And also we've included some improvements that we think that could be substantial. So let's see the design in more detail. The first step was to develop the beginner's computational thinking test in version 1. This test takes approximately 40 minutes to complete. It is 25 items long, with 3 alternative responses every item. The test contains Brennan's 3D framework basic computational concepts, ordered in increasing difficulty according to young students. And these are sequences, simple loops, nested loops, and conditionals, if then else, and why. And well, there are 2 types of items in the test. Canvas type and maze type. This is just as computational thinking test from Marcos Roman, but they are we've adapted these items, and in considering that the target population has lower reading and writing and overall skills, the decisions we took were aimed at making the test easier and accessible for young people, for example, with the least possible text, or creating symbols that are intended to connect emotionally with the students. So for example, the main challenge in the items, for example, in this item shown in the slide, is to carry a chicken along to the hen through the maze. The maze could be small or large format, so we have challenges of different complexity. And also there could be obstacles to avoid, for example, a cat, or there could be objects to collect along the way as pickups, for example, another chicken, as you can see here. Well, in this first design, Response alternatives are laid out as sequences of thick arrows, numbers, and colors. It depends on the computational concept that is involved in each question. Here we have one just with arrows, but there are more different answers. Each answer has a top-bottom vertical layout and not horizontal from left to right as it was in the Romance test. And we took this decision because code sequences read in this direction is top-bottom. So here we wanted to do it the same way. Well, this top-bottom layout revealed to be an adequate arrangement in pilot tests, but there were some problems related to Canvas item layout, because if the dotted line was to be drawn from bottom to top, students tended to read the answers from bottom to top. But this problem was solved, avoiding these drawing directions, as you can see in the item on the top right-hand side of the slide, where just every Canvas item is drawn from top to bottom or from left to right, because if not, students like it get stuck. One of the major improvements included visual transitions. This is quite important in mazes. As you can see in the slide, in maze B, that we've included transitions, because maze layouts, every maze layout we know, in every test we know, consists on a square matrix where students must figure a path in order to reach a target or to solve a problem, passing from one square to another in a particular order. In this case, we added visual transitions between squares, and this has been a very substantial improvement, because our hypothesis is that difficulties with this type of layouts at early ages are related with disorientation and hesitations about whether the current and the target square at each step should be part of the path sequence or should be ignored. Besides, adding transitions turned the maze into a state diagram that is a main item in algorithms and coding and has proved to improve the capability to understand problems. So, for example, to explain it better, this is an example of an if item, if else, and here in this case we have no transitions and C is the correct answer. But it is not clear for the children if the target square is, you'll see, this one. So the correct answer will be A, because they think that the chicken is besides the hen, so they've arrived. Or this one, that is option C, and it's the correct one. So if we add transitions, as you can see, we reduce ambiguity because each arrow corresponds directly with a transition. So here, the first arrow corresponds with the first transition, the second with the second, and the third with the third. So only C could be the correct answer. Then when we have this first design, a content validation process of this version of the test was completed through expert judgment, where 45 experts with different profiles, such as computer science experts or primary school teachers, were asked, and data was collected by 65 items form. The experts were consulted about item difficulty level, item relevance to measure computational thinking, test length adequacy, graphic interface adequacy, also about the improvements we've included, about their adequacy, and also any suggestions or comments they wanted to do, they did. So some of the results are shown here. For example, the experts perceived an item growing difficulty along its items, and in the graphic below we can see that the relevance for measuring in CT grows similarly along the test items, and that the experts perceived a medium to high relevance for each computational concept. In the pie charts that you could see at the right, most of the experts, you can see that most of the experts considered the test length adequate, and also a good or very good adequacy of the test to evaluate computational thinking in primary school students. As you can see, also the 83% of the experts estimated that the addition of transitions to the maze layouts is positive and considered it a clear improvement to facilitate the understanding of the problems. Here you can see some of the most common comments they made. For example, this is a quite good comment. It says that the allowed paths are clearer with transitions because it excludes diagonal movements. And this is also we didn't think about this at first, but a lot of experts said this, and it's true. They can't do diagonal movements, and sometimes when in the traditional mazes, they do diagonal movements. I don't know why, there's no arrow, but they do. And also transitions are easily associated to arrows in the answers, or in the design without transitions, dots are generated about when the character reaches another. For example, if the two chickens are together also in the same square or in different squares. And also lots of experts, especially primary school students, did this comment that the test is too hard. They think that it was very, very hard for primary school students. So we'll come back to that later. And well, then the version 2 of the test was designed based on all these experts' comments and suggestions and results. And many features were modified and added. For example, an explanation of an item of each of the 6 different computational concepts must be performed orally in front of the students before they take the test. So we have also 6 examples, and these examples has to be explained to the students before they take the test. Here you can see an item that is a nested loop that is very difficult for students, for these little students. And also we added one alternative response more to reduce random answering. And also if else and if then else items were reformulated for a better correspondence with the computational concepts. In items that include, that contains a cat to avoid, it is specified that the square occupied by the cat is not crossed. In items that include another chicken, it could be ambiguous. This is what expert says. It could be ambiguous whether the 2 chickens should continue together after they have met or not. So in the second version of the test, the other chicken is replaced by a flower to collect. So they collect the flower and they go where the mother is with the flower. The examples of meaning that contained the last items are clear. So moreover, to ensure that students with color blindness can read the symbols in some of the items, a specific shape was associated to each different color. So the test version 2 was administered to nearly 300 primary school students from 5 to 12 years old, following an action protocol in 3 different schools. 2 versions of the test were printed. One of the versions, the BCTT, you can see here, it was printed with transitions between squares in the mazes, and another one without transitions, the BCTT variation. So we can compare them afterwards. The tests were printed in paper form, so students' skills or previous experience in the use of computer devices do not interfere with the results. So the test with transitions between maze squares was administered to some of the subsamples, as you can see in the table in the slide. Here you can see the BCTT, that is a test with transitions. It was administered to A, B, C, D, E, and F subsamples, and the BCTT variation, this is without transitions to the other subsamples. And also, after 5 weeks, the test was re-administered to one of the subsamples, to the D1 subsamples, as you can see in the graphic below. Well, we'll come to this later too. In this slide, you can see some of the results obtained. For example, considering the test score as the sum of the correct answers along the 25 items of each test, to evaluate transitions relevance, the test scores were compared to the test variation scores, which is the test without transitions. So we compare those two scores with students' t-test, and we found that they weren't significant differences in students' scores from 4th to 6th grades, but they were very significant differences in test scores with p equals 0.005 in lower grades. So we concluded that younger students benefit from the addition of these transitions. The descriptive statistics show an overall high mean and no significant difference between last grade scores. And all of this suggests that the test might be aimed at primary first stages, and that it wasn't so hard as experts thought in their comments. So they think that it was very, very hard, and it was not. Also, we studied correlations between other competences and found that good results in the test were highly correlated to high scores in maths, for example. Well, and then a deeper analysis, we made a deeper analysis, splitting items into computational concepts and counting how many students answer correctly the items of each set. It can be seen on the left-hand side of the slide that nested loops and conditionals reveal the lowest success. Also, the initial test items could be too easy for older students. So they found it not too hard, but too easy. Well, the progressive difficulty anticipated by the experts was confirmed, and also the histogram related to the first grades shows a distribution which is fairly symmetric, so the test is balanced in terms of difficulty for these grades, for young students, for the first stages. To evaluate the internal consistency of the test scores, a reliability analysis was made. Cronbach's alpha was 0.824, considering all grades, the global value, which is considered a very good reliability. And results by grades shows a lower alpha the higher the grade, which is a bit strange, and leads us to conclude again that the test is aimed at first primary school stages. A second reliability test was made, performing a task and retask method with D1 subsample. The test was repeated 5 weeks later, and again, a very good reliability was obtained. Therefore, it can be concluded that the beginner's computational thinking test is adequate for the assessment of computational thinking in primary school students. However, it seems to be aimed at 5 to 10 years old students, since the reliability is higher in younger students. Transitions between M-squares, we think it happened to be a very significant improvement for young students and do not affect older students. So we think it's a good idea to include transitions in this kind of tests. It is highly recommended, this test, to be used in parallel with other assessment tools as part of a system of assessments, as this test focused on computational concepts just partially on computational practices and ignores computational perspectives, just as Marcos Roman's computational thinking test did. So, but it could be used As a pre and post-test instrument, in fact, we are using it to evaluate our learning assessment instrument that we are doing now. We are developing based on collaborative video games. And well, further research concerns the administration of the test to 3 to 4 years old or so students to establish the lower age limit, because we have the top limit, but we haven't established the lower limit yet, and to replicate the study in other countries and populations. Currently, the test is being used at schools as a test in other countries, such as Portugal, Czech Republic, France, Germany. So we have translated the test in many languages for now. And well, I think that the test is far from perfect, but we think it's a good start. So we've begun a collaboration to improve the test, including other computational thinking components in collaboration with Cornell University in New York. But of course, we are open to any other collaboration to improve the test. And well, I think it's a bit early, but I think this is all. This brings me to the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll be here for your questions.
That's great, Maria. Thank you very much. Can we do our thank you that we do, our jazz hands, traditional seminars? Thank you to Maria. That's really brilliant, and you didn't have England up there on the list, so we'll see what we could do about that. So now, as we do traditionally, we're going to break into small groups so that we can discuss the paper, the presentation, and in your groups, could you make sure to start with that you introduce yourselves to each other, and that if you want to, you can use the whiteboard. But make sure that whoever uses the whiteboard, saves a copy of it, does a screenshot of it before you exit the breakout. Otherwise, you lose your carefully crafted comments when you want to come back. And then we'll come back in about 15 minutes, Diana. Yep, so we've got plenty of time to have a discussion and seeing if in your groups you can come up with some really good and challenging questions for Maria. Enjoy. Welcome back, everybody. Plenty of opportunity to ask Maria some questions. Who'd like to go first?
Yeah, so first of all, I would like to congratulate Maria on their work. And I would like to know if they have considered the dimensionality of the test in their analysis, because I had the impression that, for instance, on their reliability analysis, it was I mean, that result was based on the whole test, and if they have conducted any kind of factor analysis.
Maria, you're on. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you for your question, Mark. Well, yes, you are true. You are true. It's true. We've just focused on like the scores in the test as a global. Yes, we split on different computational concept sets, and we saw that it was less. We have lower success on, for example, nested loops, but we haven't. By the way, by now, analyzed the as you are asking. But I think we'll do. When we have more, I think we are doing more tests with more students. So when we have more data, I think we'll do that analysis.
Thank you.
Should we have a go?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? So
Yes.
I was with Oliver, and first of all, Maria, where are you? I've got to tell you that I absolutely adore your guys that you work with. So Marcos came and worked with me, came and talked to me a long time ago in Brighton. So I'm a bit awestruck. So there you go. So I got that over and done with. But I think it's really cool research because you're actually doing something. So I think that's, and a lot of us are kind of going, floating about and not quite knowing what to do. But now I've got some difficult questions. maybe not. Are we right that effectively what's being created is two programming languages? That's kind of what's been created?
Sorry, can you answer?
So you've kind of created two programming languages, the one that is with the transitions and the ones that without.
No, it's the same questions. The only difference is that in the maze layouts there are transitions between squares and in the other not. It's the only difference. There are not two different languages.
But would you not say that they are two different languages? Because it's what the children are doing is they are reading that, and they've got to read that code, and they're being given extra support, or they're being given extra information in order to then be able to execute or trace or run the program.
Maybe you can consider this transition as an extra information. Yes, you can. But in fact, it's the same question, and there are the same answers when the maze is with transition and without transitions. And the correct answer is the same. But sometimes young children, not all children, but young children, get confused if there are no transitions between squares.
So that's what I'm saying, is that you've created something. So the children themselves are like the machine, aren't they? They're acting as the notional machine, and they're executing that. So it's effective. I'm just trying to understand it in my own head, that you've got, although we as adults are saying they mean semantically the same thing, the children are really taking it as read. They're looking at the clues that they're given about that programming language. So I'm just wondering and because am I right that what you found is that there's a difference in terms of their ability to comprehend the two programming languages or the two question sets? Is that what's being tested?
Yes, I think I think you have the idea correctly, yes.
So really what we're testing is the two programming languages that you've created.
You can see it that way. Yes.
And because the older children, perhaps they've got current knowledge about how programming languages work, so they've been able to overlay their existing knowledge of actually no, you can't go diagonally, or actually, so I'm just wondering what we're really testing, and is it actually computational thinking, or is it prior knowledge about the standards or what we expect of root-based programming languages? Possibly.
Yes, well, we are testing like only one of the dimensions of computational thinking, that is computational thinking concepts. And when we are testing this, perhaps you are right in what you are saying. With no transition, like we are like thinking that young students perhaps have this knowledge and they don't. So I think yes, you're correct in your.
Because it would be really interesting to compare children. Because is it the grade 2s or the grade 2s and 4s who you found the statistical difference with?
In the first grade and second grade.
So the 2s and 4s, because it would be interesting to find out what prior experience they had of programming languages. You know, did they all start at the same base? Because if you came to England, you'd find loads of kids who know exactly how to use bbots, which you might not. So anyway, so that was kind of our kind of question.
Yes, in fact, we made interviews first of all, and we asked the children if they have computer devices and programming previous experience, so we can see if the ones that they have benefit with the transitions are or not are the same ones that have experience with programming languages. So we can see that.
So did you look at that? Is that in the paper, or is that
something? We didn't look at that, but we can.
Yeah, because it would be interesting to look at older children and to see if they haven't done code.org or have done code.org, and they know the syntax, is it, of the program? Anyway, I've got to stop asking the questions because I'm holding.
Yes. So thank you very much, because it's a very good questions and it gave me lots of ideas. So thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Jane. Is there anybody? There's lots of questions on Oliver's whiteboard. Is there anybody else wants to ask another question? you've got something, there's something on Oliver's whiteboard around removing and reducing the amount of text. Did you,
Yes.
you know if that made it easier for the younger children?
Is why the older children showed worse reliability on the test, how the upper limit was set. Okay, well, yes, we think that they showed worse reliability because they mean was high, so there is a little space for evaluating this, because there is kind of a ceiling effect on older students, and that's why the test is less reliable, because their means are very high. And what can we learn from the other subjects? And for example, yes, well, this in fact we do these correlations because we want to see if language was correlated with the results on the test, because if some of the children could read and some of the children could not read so well, we want to see if reading the questions was important. If they have higher scores if they know how to read, or if not. And no, it wasn't correlated. So the symbols were enough for the children to understand the questions. So that's why we made this correlation study, but we found that maths was correlated to computational thinking, to the scores of this test. Yes. And I don't know if I've answered the question or not.
Hayley, that you put the questions up. Do you want to explain the question there?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I think it was Naomi. Has she gone? Naomi, do you want to ask the question because it was your question, or do you want me to?
If you want, I can answer question 3. What do you think of the disconnect? Yes, this was. I don't want to say it because some of the experts may get angry with this, but when the experts were consulted, they did the test and they got scores, and they don't got very good scores. So that's why they think the test was very, very difficult for young students.
But is that, I'm going to interrupt, but is that because, again, what their view is of the notional machine and what those commands mean? So they've already got built-in assumptions about the programming constructs that are there.
Maybe it's because of that, but they got low scores, so that's why they think the test was very difficult, and maybe it is because of what you are saying, Jane. Yes.
I want to come back to Naomi, who was just about to ask the question that was in the from Hayley's group. Naomi, you're on mute. It's probably why you keep getting talked over.
Yeah, that helps. You think I'd have learned by now. So with maths, for example, we've got a really good understanding of how computational thinking is best taught in maths. What is there that we can steal from maths as a subject and science and other ones that we can apply? Because that maze stuff that you found out about diagonals is well known by people who teach like mazes in maths.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? What else do you think we could steal?
Yes, I think it's really connected. But I don't know. I have to think about that a little bit, because just now I can't think of an answer for you. Sorry, Naomi.
What do you think, Naomi? Do you know it? What do you think from maths?
I think it's because it's been around a lot longer. There's a lot more sort of like connections between different things. But it just caught my eye that you'd seen about diagonals causing a problem, and that was something that I'd seen in another subject. There must be other things. There's nothing for me that comes straight to mind, but I think it's because the example was so close to what I'd seen before. Yeah,
it must be lots of connections. So
We need to get some maths teachers, just steal them.
Yes.
Sit them down and tell them, ask them about it.
Yes, thank you, Naomi.
Good. I think we've got time just for one more question. Anything else from your group, Oliver? Or anybody else want to ask the last question?
There was one in our group. It was about, you said about replicating in other countries and wanting to do that. Obviously, the language is going to be different. Have you come across, or do you think there might be any kind of cultural variations that you'd need to take into account?
Maybe I want to see what are the differences between other countries and Spain in the scores, for example, because perhaps in other countries they start with this kind of teaching earlier or later, or perhaps children are more used to use computer devices in other countries, or so. Yes, all of that could make a difference. I think yes, that would happen. Sure.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to find out. Our resources for Raspberry Pi Foundation are in lots of countries, and we've worked really hard at translation, but we're thinking a lot about that issue. So yeah, it's interesting.
Might also help you to get at the point that Jane was making about the kind of overlay of understanding languages, understanding the programming language and how that affects it. So if you have different results in different countries, that because they're learning it at different stages, that could help you answer that question a little bit.
Yes, and I think it could be also this could be also interesting to know if we are having very low success, for example, in nested loops. It is do we have to teach that on that stage or later? So that could be also a good output of this test.
And I suppose in England, we're not teaching nested loops normally until they're kind of the older grades anyway. But that's not to mean to say that we've got progression right. But you know.
Yes, but we saw that like if 7-year-old students can perfectly understand nested loops.
Well, depending on how they're presented. I mean, I think it's interesting discussion. I mean, I suppose what Jane's getting at is how do you know what you're actually assessing, what you're really finding out, and how much is, and what context would you be using this assessment? You know, what would children be doing in their lessons, and then you'd be using this assessment, and you know, how would you use it? There's quite a lot of questions there, I think. But as you said at the beginning, we don't really have a clear agreement on what computational thinking is. And I talked to you in the breakout about, you know, we talk about abstraction, decomposition, and lots of the sort of practices, as you know, and sometimes looking to assess those elements rather than just the sort of programming concepts. So I think it's there's a lot to unpick there, but I think it's really interesting what you've been working on, and I think there is a need for us to be able to tackle this problem with young children. I don't think we're really doing it that well, and the idea that you had about complementing your beginners test with other forms of assessment.
Yes, it has to be done. It all has to be a system of assessments with many assessments working together. So this traditional test is just assessing one part. So it's important to assess the other parts with other instruments, but also the other instruments can't be on their own, because if you are assessing with an environment, you can't evaluate this environment within himself, so with itself. So you have to use many different assessments. So this assessment is just one part of a system, I think.
I think you might have designed a really nice programming language for very young children.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I've realised it's 4 minutes past 6, so we're 4 minutes past the hour, wherever you are coming from and whatever time it is for you. I think we need to say a really big thank you to Maria for answering all those questions, especially all the difficult ones from Jane in the green. We can't even see you properly, Jane.
I know, I'm like spooky.
If you, Maria's Twitter handle is up there on the screen now, and our hashtag RPF seminars, so do join in the conversation on Twitter. Also, please leave feedback. There's a feedback form there. With this, we're coming to the end of, we've got one more on our sort of season before we take a break, and we start in September again. So we're really taking note of all the feedback we've got from these seminars, and sign up for our newsletters. Catherine, who can wave at you. Catherine could wave. Catherine is giving our last seminar before we break up for the summer on gender balance in 2 weeks' time. So we're looking forward to that. That's a review of some literature that we've been looking at that underpins our own gender balance and research. Gender balance and computing project at Raspberry Pi. So we look forward to seeing some of you then. Until then, do say thank you to Maria in the chat and wave and say thank you. And thank you, Maria, for spending the time with us. It's really brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn.